To forgive is divine, so let's have a glass of wine. Welcome to episode 3 of Making the Pod. Today, I'm going to ensure my podcast speaks to the right person by defining my ideal listener using a listener persona. Hey, I'm Lauren Popish, founder of The Wave Podcasting. I help women start and grow podcasts. I recently sunset my original podcast and have decided to create a new one focused on podcasting. I'm taking you along as I build the podcast from day one. Be sure to hit subscribe and the bell notification so you never miss an episode. You can start from the beginning or pick up anywhere in the series and start learning. Welcome to Making the Pod. We're still not at the point where I can pick up the mic and start recording my new podcast just yet. We are, however, at one of my favorite phases in podcasting, defining your ideal listener. I love this phase because it's where I see the light bulbs go on in the heads of my clients. One of my favorite OG podcasters, Evo Terra, talks a lot about viability on his podcast, Podcast Pontifications. He says there are different standards we have to hold ourselves to as podcasters if we want our show to be viable. Viable meaning financially viable. In other words, you can grab your phone and start recording yourself talking and call it a podcast. But if you want to get listeners to subscribe to that show and eventually grow it to the point where you can make money from it, you have to put your listener first instead of yourself. By the way, this is true for literally every marketing platform, like your blog or YouTube channel or social media accounts. If you're posting pictures of your breakfast on Instagram and wondering why you're not getting dozens of likes and follows, it could be because your audience doesn't care about that thing, even if you do. Now, let's say you decide that you want your Instagram to help your audience eat healthier, and instead you post videos of how to create simple, healthy recipes in under 30 minutes. That's the kind of content that could get the attention of the people who are interested in healthy eating. If you don't want to use your podcast or Instagram or blog for brand or business building, then it doesn't really matter what you post or talk about. You can use your platform however you want. But if you have some kind of business ambitions for these accounts, then value to your audience should be your number one priority when creating content. Long story short, if you want to create a financially viable podcast, then you have to understand that the podcast isn't for you. It's for your audience. It can be told from your perspective and feature your unique take and opinions, but the content of the podcast should add value to your target listeners, which is where a listener persona comes in. A listener persona is a tool podcasters, marketers, and even entrepreneurs use to make sure they have someone specific in mind when creating content. It's just too easy to assume that your interests are the same as everyone else's. Your target listener might be someone similar to you, but ultimately she isn't you. Now, I have a complete video on how to create a listener persona from scratch, so use that as a companion piece to this video. But for the sake of our conversation now, I'm going to show you how I'm defining my target listeners using a listener persona. The trick to creating a good listener persona is to be super specific about who your target listener is. I'm talking details like what is her name, where is she from, and how does she spend her free time. It may feel silly to do it first, but it's the only way to get a picture clear enough that you begin to empathize with your listener. For my podcast, I know I have an ideal listener who is a female between the ages of 28 and 34. She already has a podcast, but she wants to grow it so it can act as a lead generation tool within her business. She lives in one of the top 25 US cities, let's say Austin. Okay, my target listener is starting to shape up, but at this point, I'm realizing that I don't just want to help women with existing shows on my podcast. I also want to help women who are wanting to start a podcast. The differences between these two people are significant enough that I know I actually need to create a separate listener persona for my new podcaster target listener. You will probably find yourself in the same position. It's okay to have a show that appeals to many different kinds of people. But I want to pause for 1 second here and make sure I don't send you down the wrong path. This is important, so if you're multitasking or doing something else, just tune back in for 1 minute. While your show can have more than one type of listener, it shouldn't appeal to everyone. A show that's made for everyone really is made for no one, because it's too hard for individuals to see themselves in the vague audience that you've defined. They won't feel seen, and they won't want to join the community that you're building around your content. It can seem counterintuitive, but having a podcast made for a specific niche means that you can have a better chance of growing a large community because you can attract a larger share of that audience than you could if you tried to just compete in a general category like wellness or lifestyle. We'll get into how to define your niche in a future episode, but if defining one specific person as your target listener feels tough, it could be because you're thinking too broadly about the reach of your podcast. Really dig into the individuals you want to impact through your show. Any growth and monetization strategy is built on a rock-solid, dedicated community of superfans. And to get those superfans, you have to know what defines them. What do they care about? Where do they hang out online? Creating one or more listener personas helps you answer those questions. Okay, I've put together my listener personas using the template from my guide. This is what they look like. You can do the same by going to the description of this video and using the link there to download our free template. If you want some feedback on your listener persona, put it in the comments and I'll be sure to give you my 2 cents. And if you want to follow along with the entire journey, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification, you know those steps. In the next episode, we're going to check out the competition in my niche and define my podcast's special sauce, or it factor as I like to call it. This will help ensure my podcast stands out from the crowd. I'll see you over in the next episode of Making the Pod.